I look back and it's like it was a blessing in disguise that I didn't go the traditional route where you graduate law school, you start working at a prosecutor's office like for a big county or for a big city, and you move up the ranks, right? Like I didn't go that route. I started as I got a job as a public defender, then I started doing traffic tickets, then I started doing criminal cases, and now I was able to what they call laterally move to the county to do felonies.
Yeah.
And it's a blessing because if I wouldn't have gone the route that I did, I wouldn't be like the best version of me as an attorney that I am today.
What's up, everybody? This is the Untapped Potential Podcast. I'm your host, Max Prado.
And I'm your host, Chris Navan.
And today, our special guest is Arthur Sepulveda, a deputy prosecuting attorney for King County. What's going on, Arthur? How you doing today?
What's up, man? How are you guys doing? Thank you for having me.
Hey, thank you for coming through.
Yeah, it's an honor.
Man. We're excited. You're the first person, that has his law degree on the show. So, honor to have you, man.
Yeah, and you live down the street, man. So it's like,
well, it's been a while since I've seen all you guys too. So it's great to catch up.
Yeah, for
sure,
real,
man.
Yeah, man. And you have a lot of interesting perspectives. So we're excited to kind of pick your brain a little bit. But before we get started, we want to make one thing clear, that any opinions that Arthur shares today should not be considered legal advice and are not representative of the city of Bellevue or King County. So now that we got that out of the way, let's dive right in. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Arthur, where you come from and, what inspired you to go into a career in law.
Sure. Well, I was originally born in Southern California, in a small town called Indio. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Coachella Fest.
Yeah, Indio, California.
Yeah, that's where it's at. That's where Coachella's at.
Yeah, that's where Coachella Fest is at.
Cool.
It's right near Palm Springs. My family, or my immediate family, moved up here when I was about 5 or 6 years old, up to the Linwood area. Been here kind of ever since. I think what inspired me to go to law school, I mean, I'd always been interested in it because of like Law and Order and, the law shows or Dateline. Yeah, first 48 hours crime shows type
like
stuff.
Criminal Minds?
Yeah, Criminal Minds.
That's a good show.
But I think my first experience in a courtroom that like actually impacted me, my cousin was facing like some murder charges.
Wow.
Yeah, we happened to be, I was going down to California for a wedding. We just happened to be in town and he happened to have a court date. So we went to like kind of support him.
Yeah.
The allegation was that he had like shooken a baby to death.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm young parent, smoking weed, all this stuff. Whether he did it or didn't do it, I don't know. And I've never gotten a chance to look at the reports or anything, but I just remember being in court and not understanding anything that was going on, and no one could explain to me, like no one in my family could really explain what's going on. The lawyer wasn't doing a great job, or at least I don't think he was doing a great job.
Yeah.
And this was when you were how old?
I would have been in high school at this point. So the charges he was facing, that happened like in middle school, but like some of these proceedings can take a long time to get through through the system.
Yeah.
And so and I was just like, this just doesn't seem fair. Doesn't seem right that no one can tell us what's going on.
Yeah.
And then, I had thought about going to law school, but I was really good at math and physics. So everybody's like, no, be an engineer. Went to UW and go Dogs.
We'll let that one slide.
But the engineering wasn't from. I started discovering, and I've like now that I've reflected, where I'm at. That every time I went to try to do a career or some kind of undertaking because I was like chasing money or like this position's going to make me rich or whatever, it never succeeded. Like I ended up quitting, never following through, and that's because there wasn't any like true passion behind it. And so that's why I was like engineer, internship at Boeing, all these guys are making money, they seem to have cool jobs, so I was thinking that I should do that too. Then I wasn't in the mindset when I started college to really want to chase that kind of career, that focus, that self-discipline to do well in those classes, those competitive classes. And a friend of mine when we were graduating was like, hey, I'm going to take the LSAT. Actually, one of our fraternity brothers. I'm going to take the LSAT. You should take it with me. And I was like, well, I'm not doing anything with my life right now. I need to. So I took the LSAT with him. I remember my mom saying it's this is going to be an expensive mistake if you don't end up liking law school.
Damn.
Yeah.
So like make sure you're choosing this right. Like this is something you're actually passionate about and dedicated towards. Yeah. Took the LSAT. We both took it together. I ended up going to law school and he did not.
Oh wow.
Yeah. And
what was your undergrad in?
I ended up majoring in history because I thought I wanted to be a teacher.
Gotcha.
After that whole engineering thing didn't work out.
Yeah.
And then teachers are still underpaid, but they make a lot more than what they were making when I was coming out of college. And then as I'm applying to law school, my cousin was murdered, and a different cousin, and so that got me back interested in criminal law again. And then I got to law school, and I was like, well, again, chasing money, thinking like, growing up like working class. Latino, like when I moved into this area, like I was like probably the only Mexican in my school, maybe two others, right? Latino. Yeah. So I grew up in a predominantly white community, and I think wanting to like get myself out of this working class, social class, economic class, and try to uplift my family in that way. Right. I was like chasing the big law job where you're in these fancy big law firms. Like, have you guys ever watched Suits? Yeah, yeah, like trying to be in one of those, and make a lot more money. And I couldn't get an internship in one of those, and I got an internship as a sole practitioner. But my internship, my 2L year, I was able to get into a prosecutor's office, and the first time in court was for traffic tickets, and I like enjoyed that.
You enjoyed sitting in court for traffic tickets?
Well, yeah, I mean, like I got to act like an attorney. Like I pretty much was an attorney. I was a Rule 9. Which like gives you certain licenses to kind of practice as long as you're being supervised by an actual attorney. So I got to be in court and do all the things that prosecutors kind of do. Yeah. And then I had my first trial. So that and I had never had so much fun in my life trying a case. It was like I walked out of there even though I lost, knowing that this is what I was meant to be. Like the passion, like the fun of it, the drive. I was just like, the adrenaline rush. Yeah. I walked out of that courtroom even after I lost, after like having feedback from my supervisor about how that trial went, and I'm just like, no, this is where I'm meant to be.
It just clicked for you.
Yeah, and then since then, like that's what I've been like working, like trying to get the position I just got hired for. So
that's cool.
What about the trial that like got you hooked though? Like, was it like preparing and presenting your case and like arguing the facts?
I think it was the courtroom experience itself, like doing the opening, cross-examining, direct examining witnesses, closing arguments, like all this process, because in a trial in its simplest form is really just a game of chess moves and strategy. You have to be quick on your feet. Yeah. Nothing goes as planned. You don't know what your witnesses sometimes are going to completely say, like, or they'll change their story on you, and you got to be able to, that moment, be ready to react to that, come up with something, or a different question, or just be prepared. A defense attorney might throw a curveball at you. The judge might, suppress a piece of evidence that you were counting on, or say, actually, you can't ask that question, and you got to be, either ready to ask a different question or change your strategy on the fly. And then you have, depending on what level of court you're in, 6 or 12 people determine who's right and who's wrong, I guess.
Man, it's a little bit of an art form in there, right?
Yeah, there is. Everyone has their own style, and that's kind of cool. Is that I like, I've slowly crafted my own style over the years. Yeah. Through a big part of my style now, I created through my mentor. Showing me like this might be a better way of how you present a case, and then the type of case also determines on maybe how I would present it too. Yeah. But yeah, it is an art form. And if you've ever played like organized sports, or like been in a game, like in a big game in high school, or like just like a championship game, it's like that is the feeling that I got. And
gotcha.
And so, you're nervous heading into trial. I'm not as nervous anymore. I'm sure when I have my first felony trial, I'll be nervous as all get out.
Right, yeah.
But something happens when you, like, the judge walks in, the lights turn on. So it's like what professional athletes say, something click and everything just goes away, and you're just in the zone and you're just cruising. Yeah. And that's probably the favorite part of my job is, at least for me, is actually when I get to try a case.
That's cool.
It's like when you're working on the weekend preparing, it's like, why did I agree to do do this, right? Everyone else is having a good time, enjoying the sun, and I'm stuck in the office. Working. But then once the trial actually starts, I'm just like, oh man, this is so much fun.
That's why.
Yeah. It's, I mean, I don't know if you guys saw like the George Floyd trial on TV. Like, I obviously I cared about the result, but I was watching it to see how like the attorneys were like, what were their strategies? Like, why did they approach it this way?
Right.
And at times it was, I don't have all the facts that all the information these guys have, but I can still deduce. And it was just like really fascinating to watch what I could watch of it.
Yeah, man. No, it sounds like you're really passionate about what you do.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
No,
that's important, right? You're waking up every day and you're doing that.
Well, and that was the thing is, in my internship, I woke up every day excited to go to work.
Yeah.
At the city of Bellevue, every day I was excited to go to work. I mean, that's not to say that I didn't wake up some days like being like, man, I wish I didn't have to work today, right? Like it's like I want to sleep a little bit more, or it's such a beautiful day, I don't want to be in the office all day, right? Type of deal. But like in terms of the work itself, like, I'm always excited. Like you just don't know what you're going to get when you get into the office that day. What's going to come across your desk? What kind of case is going to come? The facts. It's just always interesting and
keeps you on your toes.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and then in court, there's always some kind of drama happening.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And so real quick, I want to go back. We talked a little bit earlier this week, and you had explained that your first opportunity out of law school from Seattle U was being a public defender for 10 months.
Yeah.
What was that experience like?
So I knew, like I spoke earlier in law school, I figured out that prosecution was where I felt, or what I knew what I wanted to be.
Yeah.
And getting out of law school, it's sometimes can be very challenging or hard to get into some of these prosecution offices. They're competitive. A lot of people kind of go after them, and a lot of places want experience.
Yeah.
Would you say there's more demand for people coming out of law school to be prosecutors?
I don't know if there's more demand, but they're government jobs, so also funding. So there's only a certain amount of positions, and a lot of these offices are still somewhat understaffed. Like they could always use the amount of cases, they could always use more prosecutors, but whether they have the funding to hire more prosecutors. At least when I was coming out, for example, someone had to retire for them to get a new spot to hire someone.
Wow.
In certain offices like that, because people don't leave. Some people don't leave either. So it's hard to move up, or hard for them to hire new people.
Yeah. It's not like a private company, like, we're expanding, we're going to add 10 new positions this year.
It's not like that. I think sometimes it can be, right? Like they get extra funding and then they can, but it can be tough. And so I wasn't, it was either no one was really hiring, or you don't have I'd get an interview, or sometimes I wouldn't, and I'd go through the interview and then I'd get the phone call or an email saying like, hey, you're one of the finalists, but we went with the person who had more experience than you. And it's like, well, obviously I'm out of law school. The only way I'm going to get experience is someone hires me.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't able, I needed a job to start paying bills. So I was, what's going to keep me relevant in my field? What's going to still give me experience? So when I go into that interview, they're like, well, you want to be a prosecutor? Like, what's your experience in criminal law? I could be like, well, I've been doing X, Y, Z. Now I do have experience in court. I've still handled cases.
Yeah.
And so being a criminal defense attorney was a way to get that experience that people were saying was missing from my resume. And yet, I couldn't get into an office.
Yeah.
I had one prosecuting attorney somewhere where I'd interned for a whole summer. And I remember pretty much working for free, and I had applied, and then, he, as a courtesy phone call, I guess, as he would like to call it.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm only telling you this because you, worked here for a year for free. But yeah, you need to go work for some tiny office or some tiny county, and then come talk to us. And it's like, well, the experience that was, I just, if anything, that drove me more, because it's kind of like, you can't cut it here. And to him, maybe he thought he was doing me a service or something, giving me some advice. But to me, it was kind of like a little bit of a slap to the face.
Ooh, right. After spending a year?
Man.
Yeah, after pretty much spending a year there.
For free.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, and I thought I'd done a pretty good job. And and then my plan was, okay, so I got a job as a public defender. Now how am I going to explain this in the interview with the prosecutor's office, because it's an adversarial system. So I'm on the other side, like, how are they going to view that?
Right.
And just real quick for those listening, what can you explain what a public defender is and what a prosecutor is, and essentially their roles that they play?
Yeah. So a prosecutor represents the government or the community essentially in court against the accused, someone who's accused of committing a crime, and they're in charge of, taking that case through the whole system.
Right. Got it.
In other jurisdictions, they're called district attorneys. So in California, they're not called prosecutors; they're called district attorneys. Same in New York, DAs. Yeah. So that's what.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, and a public defender is a type of criminal defense attorney. So, in our country in the '60s, a case came out that said that if you can't afford an attorney, you have the right to have one appointed on your behalf.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean you get to pick who that attorney is, but you get to have one. So they're typically called public defenders, and they're attorneys like, go through law school like everyone else, got the same kind of training, and they typically are a nonprofit or it's another form, probably could be a government agency.
Yeah.
There are, like, in smaller cities, say like the city of Everett, where my job was, it was a private law firm that got the contract from the city. And so you represent people who couldn't afford to hire their own attorney.
Okay.
Typically, they're not paid as well as the private criminal defense attorneys, because private criminal defense attorneys, it's their business. It's like it's a private business. That firm, it's a private law firm that you've hired. So
gotcha. Okay.
They can set the price. Usually, the people who have the contract for the private defense or the public defense fund, it's an agreement for, like, this case is, we're going to only pay you this much for that case. And you have to go through the whole case that could end up actually being worth a lot more.
Makes sense. And so you did that for 10 months.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, man, what are some of the craziest cases you were assigned to, people you had to defend, stories you can tell us from there?
And we had experiences where, a client would come in and they probably should not have been in our office in terms of, like, they'd get very upset, start yelling at you, all this stuff. Wow. Or I remember one time we had to escort, like, he was in one of my coworkers' office and, like, would not leave. And so we had to go in there, like, me and a couple of guys were like, dude, like, you have to leave or we're going to have to call the cops on you. Like, and finally we were able to, like, somewhat, like, using a little bit of force, get him out.
Yeah.
Wow. Have you ever encountered a case where you had to defend somebody and you just looked at the evidence and you're like, this guy did it? Like,
that's a good majority of the cases, right? Most of the time, like, when you're talking about, like, a theft from, like, Fred Meyers or something, that it's on video. And it's like, there's, like, so many of those. Yeah.
How hard is it to defend those cases, though? Like, if there's just the evidence is just stacked against this person?
At that point, it's not so much of, like, trying to get the case dismissed. It's trying to get them the best possible deal. And sometimes, like, maybe it's, like, his first theft, and I'll go to the prosecutor. I'll be like, hey, this is his first one. Like, is there a diversion program that we can get him into or her into so that she or he doesn't have this on their record? Other times it's kind of like, hey, I see that, he's, he has a lot of these. I get that. And you want to punish him toughly for it. But, since this last one, he's gotten his life somewhat together, right? He's now in treatment. He's doing really well. And as you can see from, February, now we're in, like, November, he hasn't had anything new happen. Can you give him this break or give him this opportunity to continue to keep getting his life together instead of sending him back to jail? That's going to disrupt all these services. And so sometimes it's not so much getting them off. It's learning your prosecutor or the person that you're negotiating with and communicating with, their style, and then what they need to hear or how they like things to be presented or how much they care. To get them to hopefully bring some of those things down. Yeah. Sometimes people can be unreasonable. Like, I had a guy on my first solo public defense trial was a physical control, and they were being really unreasonable in the negotiations. So by the time we went to trial, he'd already had done what if the mandatory minimums of what the judge could sentence him to. So at this point, they were threatening us to, like, really punish him so much more if he didn't plead guilty. And I was just like, I don't think the judge is going to sentence so you're pretty much punishing my client for going to trial. Yeah. And I don't think the judge is going to sentence him to the amount of time that you're asking for, especially on the facts of this case. Yeah. And, I thought I could win this case. Lo and behold, I learned some lessons on that trial. We lost, but, my client was, like, really appreciative. He thought I did a good job. And He knew it, and I was like, look, you already did the time anyway, so you have nothing to lose at this point. What you're going to lose is if the judge sees it as the prosecutor sees it, you're going to do some more time, but you're already in there. And he was okay. He's like, it's worth the risk, because if you win, this doesn't go on my record. And at the same time, even if we lose, I might get I might get out because I've done the time already. So he was gracious about it. And hopefully when he got out, I worked with his family to hopefully get him in. I think a big challenge is victims or family members want X, Y, and Z done for their individual that's facing these charges, but my duty isn't to them. My duty is to the individual. And so although that might be best for his like personal life, that might not be best for his like case, like in that situation. Or if that's not what he wants to do, I have to listen to what he wants to do. And so, if he doesn't want to agree to those things, then it's like, then it's a no, right? And so sometimes people want to influence, like, well, why can't the court just force him into services? Well, one, he hasn't pled guilty to anything, so the court doesn't have authority to force him to do that yet.
Got it, yeah.
Two, even if they do impose that, sometimes they'll give individuals multiple opportunities before they just send them to jail. I think, for a lot of these lower level crimes, like when drugs or addiction is the issue, or mental health, the point isn't to lock people up. It's to try to get them the help that they need so that they're not coming through the system again, and that they can be a functioning member of society, kind of like rehabilitate them, get them the services, hopefully get them housing. I think a big issue, especially towards mental health, is we end up having to call police for a lot of these issues. And when that happens, not that the police don't handle those things correctly or anything, it's just they're not mental health trained experts. They're and at the same time, that's their only recourse is to put them into jail. Or they're so dangerous to themselves that they have to put them in like a involuntary inpatient treatment type thing. And so the options are limited, and then once they arrest them on a charge, then it comes to my office, and now you start this whole system, and we're not necessarily geared for solving the issues that are really at hand. Sometimes people call the cops on their spouse or their partner, and they're like, well, I just wanted him to go to jail to cool off. And so as a public defender, when I'm talking to this victim, I was like, well, that's out of your hands now, right? Now the government gets to decide whether they want to press charges or not. And they'd be like, well, I don't want to press charges anymore. Well, that's not up to you. That's up to the government.
Really? Right. So even if the person that called changes their mind and doesn't want to press charges after all, the government can still decide, well, now we're going to press charges? How does the government,
the prosecuting attorney's office is the office that determines whether charges are going to be filed or not. I mean, you could have a case happen and you want it to be prosecuted, but if the prosecuting attorney doesn't think there's enough, they're not going to file charges.
Gotcha.
So, I mean, I would, it's not to say that they don't take into consideration what a victim or a witness is saying about the case, but that's not like the deciding factor. That's not the sole factor that's looked into prosecuting the case.
And so moving on into prosecuting, you became the prosecutor for the city of Bellevue. So you switched seats. Instead of defending the people, you were trying to charge them with stuff, right?
Yeah. And that's where I wanted to be. So again, I was trying to become a prosecutor. And so the position that I got was in infractions. So starting back to tickets, right? I went from being a criminal lawyer to now back to traffic tickets. And sometimes people think that, hey, I'm too big for this kind of gig or whatever. To me, I was just like, it's my foot into an office, and I'm gonna, show them. I'm gonna, do what it takes to move up into the criminal spot, or hopefully get criminal experience. That when I go to apply to a criminal position, I can now say I've been working at a prosecutor's office, and I think this is one of those things where, like, I look back, like I was talking to my boss who hired me for that position and is my mentor, and I was talking to another coworker. I look back and it's like, it was a blessing in disguise that I didn't go the traditional route where you graduate law school, you start working at a prosecutor's office, like for a big county or for a big city, and you move up the ranks, right? Like I didn't go that route. I, started as I got a job as public defender. Then I started doing traffic tickets. then I started doing criminal cases, and now I was able to what they call laterally move to the county to do felonies.
Yeah.
And it's a blessing because if I wouldn't have gone the route that I did, I wouldn't be like the best version of me as an attorney that I am today.
Because you've seen through multiple different perspectives, right? You don't just see it one-sided lens through a prosecutor's point of view. You know what it's like to be on the defending side as well.
So not only do I know what public defenders are going through when they're interacting with their clients, I luckily am still able to humanize the person that I'm prosecuting because I was, interacting with them.
Yeah.
But also when I look at my cases, I sometimes start looking at it like, what are my weaknesses? Like, where are my big holes that if I was a defense attorney, this is how I'm going to attack you. Like, this is where I'm going to go at you from. These are the angles. Yeah. Yeah. And then and then I look at it through my prosecution lens too. But on top of that, it's like also the people that I like interacted with, like my mentor at the city of Bellevue and the skills that he taught me, that he built me up. And I never started a job where, like I did there, where your boss sits you down and was like, what are your career goals? And like, what am I going to do to help you get to where you want to end up? Even if that means you're going to leave the organization.
That's awesome. That's a good boss.
And that's exactly what it's like. And so we talked about that and we would have check-ins like, all right, what do we need to do? Like, where are you at? Like, he's like, so when I came to take this job, he was the one that was like, you need to apply. Right. Like, he's like, let's prepare for this interview. Right. And was really supportive. And so it was like people like that. And so when I did like my first trial in front of him, like at this job as a prosecutor, to where when I left and where I'm at in like my trial readiness and being prepared and how I conduct a trial and how much more effective I am. I'm still learning. There's still so much more to learn. And as the cases get like bigger and maybe a little bit more complex, I learn new stuff too. And I learn things from other people going to trainings, but I have grown so much.
That's
like,
awesome.
And like, the, like how I approach things.
That's cool.
And it's just, if I would have gone the other route, I wouldn't be anywhere as good as, who knows if I would still be doing this job.
Yeah. So. And so with the pandemic, it kind of forced your job, like a lot of people's jobs, to go virtual, right? Yeah. So you're doing cases, you were prosecuting cases virtually. What are some stories that you have on, when you were doing this through Zoom, right?
People like have no shame as to how they show up on Zoom. We had one guy on there one time. You could see like some kind of hand coming, like he's laying with his shirt off. You can see some kind of hand coming, like he's getting a massage or something. Yeah. Another time, a girl was getting ready for work, so we had to be like, man, maybe turn off your camera and put like a shirt on or something, and then come back. Yeah, she's putting on makeup. I don't know if she realized, like she was probably waiting for a case to be called. We had another guy outside doing like karate, martial arts type stuff. The judge is like, sir, put on a shirt, like otherwise leave the call, and when you're ready to participate, come back on. Wow. Yeah, we had people who
and these are people who are like presenting their case, right?
These are defendants.
Defendants, yeah.
These are people who are being charged with crimes. Yeah. You saw, you had people driving where we had to be like, sir, you need to pull off the road, or
that's
call,
another charge.
That's a traffic. Yeah. So I think sometimes it would be hard when you had to use an interpreter and you have Zoom and you have like all these people that have to talk at the same time. It's a lot. I mean, it's already challenging in court as it is, and it's more challenging over the Zoom call. You had like some attorneys that, would wear like a sweatshirt, like a hoodie. It's like, come on, man. Or like a tank top. I had one guy, you could tell he was like on vacation or something. He forgot and got on the call. Yeah. So, wow. Yeah, I mean, you see everything when you come to court. Yeah,
because a lot of these are for traffic infractions, right?
No, these ones were all the Zoom calls. Most of them were for actual criminal cases.
Criminal cases.
Yeah, I'd already transitioned to the criminal side by that. I was only an infraction attorney for like a year and a half.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, so you're doing criminal infractions for Bellevue too. Okay. Yeah. Cool. So that kind of segues us into the next part of your career, which just recently you became the deputy prosecuting attorney for King County. Mm-hmm. So what's that change mean for you and kind of for the cases that you're looking at as opposed to what you were doing in Bellevue?
Yeah, so I'm looking, in Bellevue and just like in Everett, we're talking about gross misdemeanors and misdemeanors. So you're talking about people who are facing less than a year in jail. So
Yeah.
up to 364 days if it's a misdemeanor, or up to 90 days if it's a simple misdemeanor.
Got it.
And felonies where I'm at now, you're talking about people facing, like, we're talking years now. So in City of Bellevue, City of Everett, or what we'd call courts of limited jurisdiction, like district courts, we talk in terms of days. And now in Superior Court, when we're talking about felonies, we're talking in terms of months.
Okay.
In terms of how much time they face.
Yeah.
And
so bigger cases, more serious crimes.
Yeah, more serious crimes. Yeah. Sometimes it's technically a more serious crime because the dollar amount that was stolen is higher, and so it becomes a felony. So some of the elements, or like what you'd say, is still the same, but it's just more serious. Or an assault 3, like right in Bellevue or in Everett, in courts of limited jurisdiction, it's an assault 4, so it's a lower degree assault. But, an assault 3 is still an assault, but it's considered more serious because maybe it happened to a police officer, or you beat up your bus driver.
Oh, wow.
Versus, just beating up the person walking down the street or in a bar fight. And maybe the bus driver didn't get beat up as badly, but it's still an assault 3 because the law says if you beat up like a metro bus driver or something, that's considered a felony if they're driving the bus. So, so sometimes the charges are more serious, but the actions itself aren't necessarily more serious.
And you just started this role, right? Like about a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago.
Starting my second week tomorrow. So,
nice.
Wow, congrats, man.
Yeah, so I'm specifically in the Violent Economics Crime Unit.
Yeah.
Down at the MRJC, or the Malon Regional Justice Center down in Kent. And I'm just in the filing unit. So right now I am reviewing some of these lower level cases to determine whether we want to file charges. And then I go to court on certain calendars. One of them being what's called the investigative calendar. So if someone was like arrested the night before, they have to see a judge within a certain amount of time. And so we'll go to court on that, and the judge is determining, is there probable cause for the charge? And if so, what are the conditions of their release, or if they should, have bail imposed. And so I show up and handle those. And then we do like the arraignments. So once we formally decide to charge you with the crime, we bring you, or you get, asked to come to court, and it's where we read the charges to you. You're being informed of what you're being charged with. And then, and then what are the conditions again of your release, and what are your next court dates and stuff like that.
Got it. Okay. And so we asked you a little bit of what were some of the cases that you saw as a public defender. What are some of the craziest cases that you saw as a prosecutor?
So in Bellevue, there's a lot, but even you'd think like Bellevue, richer city, less crime or whatever.
Right,
People can, and that doesn't matter. If anything, sometimes it's just they're able to hire richer or more expensive lawyers.
Yeah.
You still had your, rich people still beat their wives, still beat each other up.
Yeah.
But DUI is the same. But I had a couple cases where you get people who, like one case, this guy was just walking down the street naked. So indecent exposure. Yeah. He was probably, I don't remember if he was high or just going through a mental illness, but but he's walking down the street just naked right there, downtown Bellevue,
Wow.
We had one where, I would say in terms of, for me, what was my biggest case was a DUI, but that was because of the trial that I had and the trial defense attorney that I was going up against. At that point, it was probably, to this day, it's still been the biggest trial that I've had in terms of the stakes and the attorney that I was going up against.
Is that how you see it as a prosecutor? It's like you versus that attorney. It's like kind of like your brain versus their brain, like how you break down the case and how you present it.
Well, I'm how I see it is I'm seeking justice,
right? Of course.
But when it comes to there is a winner and there's a loser. Like in terms of me as how good of an attorney I am, that's how I see it. Is I'm trying to be the best I can in this trial, and I'm going up against maybe one of the best. What I've heard is one of the best defense attorneys in this area, and so it's kind of let's see how good I am as a trial attorney.
Yeah.
See how good in terms of that competitiveness.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's I'm competing against myself, but I'm competing against that trial attorney
that makes
too,
sense.
to see hey, he's supposedly the best. I'm just starting out here. Let's see how good am I really am at this point.
Did you take him out?
Oh yeah, I won. It was fun. Yeah. It was literally probably the funnest case I had. It had all the drama. It was the guy was on his third DUI, so he was looking at a minimum of like 90 days in jail,
That's
120
sad.
days on electronic home detention, and a bunch of fines. And he, they paid an expert witness, so they flew her out from New Mexico out here.
What's an expert witness?
In this case, she was an expert in how laboratories should be like testing or running, like, are they in compliance with their testing procedures and stuff like that, because he refused to have a breath test. So he got his blood drawn. And so they were saying that, hey, the Washington State Patrol Toxicology Lab standards aren't up to par, and so you jury cannot rely on this blood result. Like,
so they try to win on procedure because they knew
in a sense,
the guy was.
Well, wouldn't that throw out the other cases though? If
they're calling into doubt. They're not saying, and so we have our expert, right? One of the toxicologists, and he gets up there and it was like the battle of the experts for a little while. What I thought was interesting though, that they did all this with this expert witness, and then in his closing argument, he forgot, or I don't know what happened, but he didn't really talk. Like, that was their case, and he didn't really talk too much about it. And I think I had already had kind of maybe gotten into his head a little bit. Like,
gotcha.
Yeah. The moment that I knew that, at least in terms of I was doing better than him, not so much like, I don't know what a jury's going to do. You never know what a jury's going to do. You could have the strongest case, and the jury could still find him not guilty or her not guilty.
It's just random people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just average citizen. It's just any citizen.
Yeah.
And we people say like you select your jury. You don't really technically select the jurors. It's more or less weeding out people that you think would not be good jurors for your case. So,
and then whoever's that, is it the prosecutor that?
So the prosecutor and the defense attorney. We question the jurors. We ask them questions. They talk. I try not to talk too much. I want them talking so I can learn as much as I can about them, and hopefully the jurors themselves talk amongst themselves, so that sometimes, I'll have this really good juror and they might not even make it onto the juror, but I'm like, please keep talking about your experience with the drunk driver. Like, this is a case about drunk driving. I want all of them to hear it, because then I can go into like my closing argument and be like, hey, you remember in jury selection, this case is just like what that woman was saying when she got hit by a drunk driver and how that person was acting. Well, this guy was acting the same way. And
that throws out their opinion because they're biased, right?
Well, or in that case, it could. Maybe I can rehabilitate her. I could ask her, is your experience there going to impact your decision on this case?
Got it, okay.
Probably it is, but she might say no, and we have to take it for what it's worth. Then it's whether we use a peremptory challenge, meaning I get to excuse people without being questioned. Yeah. I can't excuse them based on their race, though. There's law that says I can't do that. But in terms, I could be like, so let's say I tried to excuse someone and they challenged it, saying like, he's getting rid of her because that's the only brown person on the jury, So I have to explain why I'm getting rid of them, and it can't be because they're brown. I would have to probably be like, Your Honor, I think, this person, says that they can't follow the law. Yeah. And so I don't think they would be a good fit. We don't get to really pick our jurors in that sense. We kind of like eliminate, and then you hope that, and then you only get a certain amount of eliminations. Right. Mm-hmm. So you're kind of stuck with whatever it is, and sometimes you don't have that much time to find out that much information. Like usually on these smaller trials, it was only like 20 minutes. I got to talk to these people.
Wow. Yeah. It's cool to hear that perspective though, because as someone who doesn't really know a lot about like court proceedings and how juries are like picked out and stuff, it's cool to hear that perspective. Yeah. What would you do in a situation where, you get pulled over, and what's the first thing you would do?
If I was pulled over, and I have been, like even recently, what I usually do is I like, I roll down my window. Being like a person of color, I keep my hands on the steering wheel so they can see my hands. And usually the officer's gonna ask, do you know why I pulled you over, or license and registration or something like that. I usually do not tell them, like if they ask, do you know how fast you're going? I don't answer those questions, because I don't want to incriminate myself if I'm speeding.
Any questions.
Yeah, I mean, like, people think that they can talk themselves out of things, and that's just not usually going to go well. Like, you're just going to get yourself into more trouble. So usually the best thing is to like only answer questions that you have to answer, right? Like, what's your name or something like that, the information that you have to, like, identifying information. Like if they ask you for your driver's license and they pulled you over, you have to give them your driver's license and stuff like that. So, usually I'll be like, hey, can I reach into the glove box so I can pull out my registration? So like, as I can see the officer walking up, I usually have my driver's license and insurance ready that I can hand them as I'm holding on to the steering wheel.
Right. That you got out of your pocket.
Yeah, that I usually got out of my pocket. Yeah. And then, you know, well, I got you going this fast, and I'll just be like, you know, I don't try to answer the questions.
Yeah.
If I was, if someone, or what I would tell a friend, if they're getting in trouble for something criminal, yeah, definitely don't say anything. You know, ask to talk to a lawyer. Because you actually don't have the right to a lawyer until you've been arrested or Mirandized. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So like if you like, as they're investigating, like say you get pulled over for a DUI and they're just barely investigating it, you don't have the right to a lawyer. So you know, until you're placed under arrest or they're like, hey, you have the right to remain silent. Yeah, you don't actually have the right. And on top of that, never argue with the cops. That's not going to get you anywhere. Like the point to if you feel like they've done you wrong, the point to handle all that is in the courtroom, is to let your attorney take care of that in the courtroom, because the cop in that point he has all the power. Like they're the sole authority in that situation. You're not going to have anyone that's going to get you out of there. So don't make it worse on yourself. You know, you don't want to get tased or shot. And I'm not saying that in other instances that even though these people were cooperating, still end up getting shot. But you don't want to put yourself where they have an excuse to do something too. Right. And so in the sense, you know, like arguing or being disrespectful or stuff like that, I try not to. And and just because just for my own safety at that point. Yeah. Right. And I know it's not going to get me anywhere. Like, I think, you know, when the George Floyd protests were going on, I was driving home. It was the one time during this pandemic before I started my new job that I actually had to go into court. And I was driving back. I'm in my suit. And they had put up all these roadblocks around the Alderwood Mall. And I, at that point, used to live by there. And so I had to go through these roadblocks to get to my house. And I remember the officer just being like, state your, like, you know, I pulled up to the roadblock. I'm like, hey, my house is on over there. Like, you know, I need to get through. I see you've let some cars through. Like, now it's my turn. And he's like, state your business in Linwood. And I'm like, he's already like coming off really aggressive. And a part of me is like, all right.
Get triggered right away.
Yeah, I got triggered by it big time. Like when someone in authority is coming at me like that. And, but you know, I had to be like, I live here. And then he's like, oh yeah, prove it. Wow. And so I handed him like my driver's license. But, because even though I'm a prosecutor, I'm not allowed to tell these guys. Like I can't show them my badge because I you know, then I'm using something to get me out of trouble, right? And that's something that I'm not. But in that case, he was being so disrespectful and like not letting me go. Like I'm in my suit and tie. I have my cases right here on my seat, my briefcase, and this guy's. And so I was like, hey, like, I'm just trying to get home. Is this going to be an issue? Like, by the way, I am a prosecutor. Like, is this an issue for me to get to my house? And he's like, prove it. That you're a prosecutor.
Oh, yeah,
really?
Goodness,
so luckily I had my work badge and I showed it to him. And all of a sudden he saw that his whole attitude changed.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah. And he's like, oh, okay, yeah, go through. I mean, he had been letting other cars go through, so I don't know.
He just made it a big deal for you specifically. And you saw that.
Yeah. And I told my boss right away, I don't know if I'm allowed to do this, but like I was just trying to get home. Yeah. Like man, I wasn't trying, like I'm not getting pulled over for a ticket. I'm not trying to get out of anything. Yeah. It's like, it was like kind of like put a little bit of respect to my name, right? Like before you mistreat me. And so, so that would be the only time and the one time that I've actually like told an officer like, hey man,
use
like,
that card.
Yeah. And that was, of course that he finally let me go through and stopped giving me a rough time. Yeah. And so, you know, that goes to show that even when I interact with officers, it's like I still try to
safe, even prosecutors.
Yeah,
man. Yeah. No, that's cool. Thanks for sharing that advice. Yeah. So, kind of to summarize it a little bit, is don't say anything, don't answer any questions right off the bat. Just give the I guess identification that they're asking for, registration, all of that.
Yeah, or you could always ask like, "Hey, am I free to go?" And if you're free to go, get the hell out of there. Like, or am I being detained or something like that? Always you can ask that, or you know, hey, can I call my lawyer or can I talk to a lawyer? And if they say no, not yet, then, you know, shut up.
Once you're under arrest though, right? You have the right to an attorney.
Yeah. The moment they tell you have the right to one, you should definitely call them.
Do that first.
Speak to them. Yeah. And there's numerous reasons for that. But you know, even if they're starting to question you and they say, hey, you're not free to go, I would still ask, well, can I talk to my lawyer? And if they say no, well then, you know, you're going to have to wait. But at least I would let them know that I'm invoking my right to have my attorney. Yeah. So that, you know, they have to stop asking me questions to an extent.
And then just let it get handled in court. Like
and because you're not, like, they've already made up their mind as to what they're going to do. Like, so you're not, I mean, sure, people sometimes share stories how they talk themselves out of the speeding ticket. I mean, at the same time, maybe the officer just didn't want there's a whole process to writing a speeding ticket.
People actually have to write.
They didn't want to
reports
do all
and
that.
It's actually a lot of work for somebody.
They were ready to go back home for dinner or something. They didn't want to write a ticket.
I mean, I had a case where it was a DUI. The guy refused the breath test, and he didn't go get the search warrant for blood.
Oh,
and so why? And so he like, we're done with motion hearing. He's like, this is why I don't do DUIs. And I was like, if you would have done the search warrant and gotten the blood result, we would not be going through this hearing right now. Yeah. So next time, maybe do that. And then he's like, well, I was like pretty much off my shift. I didn't want to stay working longer. And it's like, well, now here we're in the situation that we're in now, right? Like, I think people think that we work for the police or the police works for us. It's like, no, as prosecutors, we're two separate agencies that work kind of together. Like, so I need them to do their job right so I can do my job better. But at the same time, I don't go out looking for cases to prosecute. They bring the cases to us.
Yeah.
I review them, and then we decide whether we're going to go forward with the prosecution of this case.
Based on the evidence that they gathered.
They gathered or at the time. I mean, they could still be investigating and get me more evidence, but at that moment, And usually when I'm reviewing a case, I'm like, can I prove it? Do I think they did it? Like, is there probable cause? Can I prove this beyond a reasonable doubt? And not just that, will a jury actually convict someone? On this charges based on what I know about the juries in our, county or city or whatever. And then there's other standards, right? Does this meet my office's filing standards? Does this, meet what we're trying to do here?
Right. There's a lot you got to consider, right?
Yeah. And again, it's like my sole job is to seek justice, right? So justice for each case can be numerous things. It's not always just getting a conviction and sending this person off to prison.
Gotcha.
So,
well, I think that's a good note to wrap up on, Arthur. Thank you so much for coming on. You shared a lot of good knowledge and your perspective and your overall journey, going into law. So thanks for coming through.
Thanks for having me. I mean, anybody can always feel free to reach out to me. I think a big passion of mine is mentoring. And that's something that luckily through the city of Bellevue I had time to do. And so anybody interested in law, going to college, or interested in being in criminal law, anytime, feel free to reach out to me.
Yeah, and if you're in King County and you have a gross misdemeanor, watch out for this guy because he will put you away.
Thanks again, Arthur. So if you're interested in reaching out to Arthur for mentorship or just have questions for him, feel free to reach out to him. We'll have his social media links in the description. Mm-hmm. As always, thank you all for watching. Leave a comment, subscribe, follow us on Instagram, and catch us next time.